It looks like RJC Man 38 just pointed out that it's 8:31. Actually, on my clock, buddy, I got 8:33. Sorry, sometimes we get a little bit late. We fall a little bit behind. I want to make sure the audio sounds okay. So some of you guys who are listening here right at the beginning of tonight's show, let me know if let me know there if this sounds okay. Today's morning pit did not sound good. I think I resolved some of the issues when I was taping tomorrow's morning pit, but it doesn't sound exactly how I want. But I want to figure out if it's an issue with my microphone or it's more of an issue with the software that I'm using. I think it might be the software. Adam Vinchik says you're good. Hopefully, if you listen to today's morning pit, you heard how it was kind of like blaring. It was sort of like the levels were too high or something, but I tried to adjust that today. But I wonder if it just might be something in the settings with the software that I'm using. Software. You can tell I cover... RJC Man says it's grainy. Let me actually make sure I got the right microphone plugged in. You say it's grainy. I don't know what grainy means. I just turned up the levels a little bit there. Sometimes these mic tests and audio checks you have to do kind of live and in the moment. So I apologize for that. But you guys can give feedback as we go through. You always do. Nobody ever hesitates to give feedback. We got a live Panther-Lair show here on a Wednesday night. We were just live yesterday after the game, Pitt's loss to Notre Dame in the ACC Tournament. I can't say that anything about that game makes any more sense than it did, 24 hours ago. Or I guess it was a little bit more than 20. That game ended around 4 o'clock. So that's about 28 and a half hours ago. It made no sense whatsoever. And it still makes no sense today, but we can certainly talk a lot about it here on the live Panther-Lair show. And then we can do football talk because Pitt spring football started on Tuesday as well. A lot of Tuesday stuff yesterday. A lot of things were going down. Pitt spring football started Pitt spring football started in the morning. Pitt basketball had that game in the afternoon. We did a live show afterwards. So there's a lot going on. Certainly plenty for us to talk about here on the live Panther-Lair show. So you can put your comments and questions over there. Everybody is starting to chime in, and everybody can comment here, get your comments and questions in. I started reading some of the comments and questions. There's certainly a lot of things to talk about. I think on the football side and the basketball side and just the general world of Pitt sports side, there's always a lot to microphone fell over there. There's always a lot to discuss. So jump into the comments and questions and we'll get going. Don't forget the website, Panther-Lair.com or Panther-Lair.com on the 24/7 Sports Network. Excited to be there. We're getting great coverage of Pitt sports in addition to the recruiting coverage, which we're providing a lot of, and then awesome coverage from the national guys at 24/7 Sports. Excited to be part of this network. If you haven't checked it out yet, you can get 75% off your first year of Panther-Lair.com. And it's like $26 for the year. I mean, like, even if you don't want Pitt coverage, it's almost like you have to take that because it's like $2 a month or something when you sign up right now. So go check it out, Panther-Lair.com. Panther-Lair.com is the place to get all the best Pitt coverage and join the best Pitt conversation on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. So go give that a look. That deal is only going to run, I think, through the weekend. So if you want to keep up on all the spring camp coverage and everything we've got coming out of the South Side, in addition to coverage of the basketball portal, which is coming up, it's going to start here very soon. And there's going to be a lot of activity for sure. The place you want to be is Panther-Lair.com. So go check it out, Panther-Lair.com. And then the last thing, of course, we always ask you to do, like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. We have it on the daily for you, so make sure you check in. All right, I'm just going to get into some comments and questions, and we'll kind of talk about things as we go through here. Josh Newark says, of the basketball players that have eligibility left, which do you want 100%? Which players do you 100% want Pitt to bring back? I mean, like, look, I would bring back most, if not all of them. Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, like, I know there's a lot of sore feelings after the way this season went and the way this season ended. To me, the issue is not with the guys who could potentially come back. It's with the guys that you're going to potentially bring in. The next year's success. I mean, there's always two sides of it, right? Your success in the the coming season will be determined by two things: who you bring back from your current roster and who you add to it out of the transfer portal. How many guys do you hold on to? I think you want Jalen Lowe back. I don't think Jalen Lowe played as well this year as I think all of us expected him to play. I don't think he played as well this year as Pitt needed him to play, but I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One, he's a sophomore, as a first time, leading a team for the first time. And, that brings a lot of challenges. It brings a lot of pressure. And Jalen Lowe certainly had to play under that pressure, which can be difficult. I think also some of the personnel decisions and the lineups that they put out there, and we talked about this yesterday, and we talked about it after the Boston College game. Some of the lineups and personnel decisions that Jeff Capel made did not exactly put Jalen Lowe in the best position to succeed. I think, and we talked about this. We talked about this quite a bit, about the value of having three ball handlers on the floor and how that can change things. Having different types of centers out there can affect what it's like for the point guard and how the point guard's job looks and how it works and how it functions. Maybe with different kinds of lineups around him, Jalen Lowe wouldn't feel inclined to try to win every game by himself, which I think is an exaggeration of what he tried to do this season, but not entirely an exaggeration. I think there were some elements of that in his game, which he's got to work on and he's got to clean up. But I like my personal preference, I would like to see him work on cleaning them up at Pitt, not at Miami or someplace. So I'd like Jalen Lowe back. Give me the Twins back. Give me one more year, the Diaz-Graham twins. I'd like to see those guys play at Pitt. I'd like to see them be a part of this program going forward. I'd like to see them continue to grow and develop. I think we've all moved past the point of expecting these guys to get stronger or be, somehow develop physically into a different type of player than what they are. And I think you have to, at least for their final year of eligibility, just embrace who they are, lean into it, and try to play to their strengths, which I don't think Pitt did this year. I think they did it in the past. They relied on Guillermo for a bigger role this season, but it was a different kind of role and probably one he was ill-suited for. I think you can find a better use for him. I think you can find more usage for Jorge. So give me the Twins back. Obviously, I want Amsal Delilich back. I don't think there's any question about that. I don't think anybody would be surprised that I would say that. I'd like Brandon Cummings to come back. So, that's 5 guys right there that I'd like to see return. I'd like to see Papa Amadou Kanti continue to develop. I don't know if he's going to be ready to be the big guy, the number one guy next year. But maybe if he's playing with Guillermo Diaz-Graham and Guillermo plays as the 5, he doesn't need to be the number one guy. But I'd like to see him back and see him continue to develop in a Pitt uniform. I don't know enough to say anything about Marlon Barnes and Amni Najai. Obviously, there's one guy I haven't mentioned, and he's the big question mark. And his decision this offseason is going to be really interesting to watch, because what does Cam Corrin do? I don't know what's best for Pitt. I don't know if it's best for Pitt if Cam Corrin comes back. I don't know if it's best for Pitt if Cam Corrin leaves. I really don't. I hear a lot on the message board, certainly, and, from Pitt fans, that a lot of anti-Corrin sentiment. And I get it. I understand where that comes from. I think you look over the course of the year, who was on the court when Pitt was winning, who was on the court for Pitt's success, when was Pitt better? It was typically with Guillermo Diaz-Graham playing center, more so than it was with Cam Corrin playing center. Probably one of the most stark examples was the Boston College game, where Jeff Capel went with a straight rotation of those two guys. And I've mentioned this stat over and over again, but he went with a straight rotation of those two guys. So they were never on the court together. So there was no sort of mistaking the plus minus numbers where some of the minutes were overlapped. They never played a minute together. And at the end of that one, Pitt was +1 with Cam Corrin on the court and +30 with Guillermo Diaz-Graham, even though Corrin literally scored twice as many points as Guillermo did. And so you want the players who are going to help you win basketball games. You want the players who are going to be part of a winning basketball team and just be part of winning. Like, when are you better? Like what lineups give you the best chance of win? What lineups tend to produce more than others? And I think in the limited sample size, but substantial enough to make a judgment on, the lineups were better with Guillermo Diaz-Graham as the 5. And it's not just the Boston College game that I'm referencing. I tracked I've referenced this a number of times. I tracked through, I think, the first North Carolina game, all the ACC games through the first North Carolina game, went through all the substitutions, built a spreadsheet of what the plus minus was with Guillermo as the 5 and when he wasn't the 5. And it was substantially better with Guillermo as the 5. And the Pitt was substantially better. They were like, over the course of however many games that was, plus like 38 or plus 40 with Guillermo playing the center position. That's probably the move for next year. But if you're going to go with that, then you've got to make a decision on Cam Corrin. And so that's the tricky one. So I guess Josh's question, which players do you 100% want Pitt to bring back? I 100%, yeah, I want Jalen Lowe to come back. I want Amsal Delilich and Brandon Cummings to come back. I want the Diaz-Graham twins to come back. I want Papa Amadou Conti to come back. I have an incomplete grade on Amni Najai and Marlon Barnes, and I'm less than 100%. Less than 100% on Cam Corrin. I don't know if I'm less than 50% on Cam Corrin, but I'm less than 100% on Cam Corrin. So if your question is which players do I 100% want Pitt to bring back, that's probably the list. Lowe, Delilich, Cummings, the Diaz-Graham twins, and Papa Amadou Conti. I think, unless I'm forgetting someone obvious. Am I forgetting someone obvious? You guys will be in the comments telling me about it. I don't see anybody saying anybody obvious that I forgot, but I don't know, Josh. Who do you want back? Who would you like to see return to this team in 2025? I think and we could probably take that conversation a step further. Let's say that Pitt does get Jalen Lowe back and Amsal Delilich back and Brandon Cummings back, and the Diaz-Graham twins back and Papa Amadou Conti back. Let's say they start off with those. How many is that? 6. Lowe, Delilich, Cummings, Diaz-Grahams, and Conti. So let's start there as a baseline, and you're going to add and fill in. The first thing you need is a 4. You need another power forward to play there. You could have 2 centers with Guillermo and Papa Amadou Conti. Jorge could play the 4. Amsal Delilich could play the 4. Another power forward, someone who can actually contribute and sort of play that position meaningfully, or at least shoot threes, would probably be nice. And then Delilich and Jorge could be, your 3s. Lowe and Cummings, the 1 and the 2, kind of both could play that role, although Delilich could as well. You'd need it at the minimum. You'd start with a 4, and then you'd probably want to get another guard to go in that mix. That's probably what you would be looking for out of the transfer portal at a minimum. Like, just for starters, you would need a power forward and a guard, and then try to build out from there. Some of that might depend on how, what they think about the development of Papa Amadou Conti and whether he is ready to be in a primary rotational role. Now, again, if Cam Corrin comes back, you definitely don't need to add another center, but then we're going to face maybe the biggest litmus test of the Jeff Capel era, or just the biggest test of the Jeff Capel era. Does he stick with Cam Corrin as the primary center, as you put Guillermo Diaz-Graham in that role? We're getting way ahead of ourselves, though, because all those guys have to actually come back before that decision even matters. But what do they need to add to that group? If that's the group they return, a power forward and a guard is exactly where they would need to start. All right. Couple of messages here from Pitt Tough Guy. Just a friendly heads up, the above is now onto the Board of Trustees after the Chancellor is reviewed. So I think this message came in out of order. Pitt Tough Guy says, the document is a resolution aimed at preventing the University of Pittsburgh from using student tuition, fees, or state appropriations to fund player pay as part of a settlement in the House versus NCAA case, emphasizing financial protection for students, families, employers, and employees and taxpayers. So this is a long story that I've sort of been on the periphery of. A Pitt fan, apparently with a legal background, drafted a resolution hoping that the University of Pittsburgh would adopt it to not use anything other than, basically use nothing other than athletics revenue to pay the revenue sharing as part of the House settlement. I don't even know what to say about it. Like this specific, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about revenue sharing and NIL and colleges paying players and all of that, but this specific idea of not using student tuition fees or state appropriations to fund player pay, I guess my first question would be like, well, are those monies used to fund the scholarships or the facilities or all of those things paid by athletics as well. If all of those things are paid by athletics, then yeah, I mean, the revenue sharing should be coming out of the athletic department. I think the more, I think if the university were to draw a line in the sand, like the one proposed by this fan, I think it would just further encourage the separation of athletics from the university environment. I think college sports need colleges, but I think colleges also benefit from college sports considerably. And if you were to draw a line and say we will never chip in on this, then you start pushing college, you start pushing athletics away. Athletics they're already going to have to be cuts in athletics. People are going to, administrative staffs are going to get trimmed down. Some programs are going to be cut in order to make way and clear the budget for some of these things like revenue sharing or increased scholarships, particularly for football and men's basketball. And so that's coming. Like, they're going to work to find that money themselves, but I'm sure athletics intends to go to the university and try to get more. If this Pitt sports fan who wants to make sure the university does not support athletics, if it's passed, then athletics is going to be on the hook for finding its own money, I presume. But I don't really have much thoughts on that. I have thoughts on revenue sharing, NIL. We could talk about all those things. This fan-generated resolution to prevent student tuition from paying the athletics revenue sharing. I mean, share the revenue, right? Share the revenue. Athletics should share its own revenue, I guess, is the conclusion there. Pitt beat WVU says, even though the loss yesterday, it was really tough on everyone, I still think that the basketball team can't be successful with only needing 10 players with NIL. Just go all in on football. Goes on to say, football and volleyball, the only successful programs Pitt has had in decades, if you consider a conference championship successful. So it's funny that you say, just go all in on football, because I think if you asked Pitt fans and probably most sports fans, hey, limited NIL resources, going to go all in on one sport, I think a lot of fans would say, well, go for basketball because you can do it with fewer players. Now, those fewer players might command more money because there are fewer of them, and an individual player can make a bigger impact in basketball than almost every position in football. And so I think that a lot of fans would tell you to go all in on basketball, where I think you can probably buy your way to a championship quicker and more effectively and more directly than you can with football. I mean, football takes a lot of guys. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just have a great quarterback. You've got to also have a great offensive line. You've got to have great skill players. You've got to have great pass rushers. You've got to have great defensive. Like, you need a lot of really good players all over the field, and it costs a lot of money to get those really good players. I think the separation of haves and have-nots is going to continue to grow, and that gulf will get wider on the football side more so than it will on the basketball side. Because in basketball, you really can get a couple guys, and it's going to cost a lot to get those guys, but you can get a couple guys and end up, like, finding a lot of success, really making a go of it. And, Pitt basketball brought in Cam Corn and Damian Dunn. If they'd gotten like one more player, they probably would be not on the bubble right now, either a good power forward or whatever it might have been. You can turn the fortunes around like that. I mean, you think about 2 years ago when they go from as bad as they were in the 2021-22 season to as good as they were, making the NCAA tournament and winning a couple games in 2022-23. It was largely, it was the additions of just a handful of guys: Blake Hinson, Nelly Cummings, Greg Elliott. That was it. That was all it took to transform that program and transform that team into an NCAA tournament team. Whereas this past year, Pitt brought in what looks to be a franchise quarterback, and he got them off to a 7-0 start, but he got hurt. And he got hurt because they also needed franchise offensive linemen. They needed franchise defensive ends, and they end up losing their final 6 games, including a bowl game to Toledo. So you can win, I think, if you're going to go all in on one sport, it's probably smarter to do it with basketball. because again, fewer guys can make a bigger impact. And I think there's a lot of those guys out there. I mean, there's 300 and some 330 Division I basketball teams. You look at all the teams that make the tournament. I mean, like you're telling me if like Robert Morris has guys who could play for Pitt. Like you could go get some of those guys. You probably could get them. And there are guys like that at schools like that all across the country. And I think to some extent, some of those schools have sort of accepted the idea that we're going to have this guy for a couple of years, maybe. And if he actually works out the way we think he will, he's going to end up transferring up. And I think some schools even recruit on that. So if you go all in on one sport, I think you can probably have a better go of it by going all in on basketball. Even though you're right. I mean, football and volleyball are the teams that have won conference championships somewhat recently. Let's see. Scrolling through here, looks like you guys are talking to each other. RJC Man 38 comments on the post-game press conference yesterday. It was an emotional post-game for Zach Austin and Jalen Lowe. Those guys were having a hard time holding it together. They didn't really hold it together. They were breaking down. It was tough. It was tough to watch. RJC Man says Jeff Capel should have told the guys to go back to the locker room. He has the press conference covered. I think there's probably some official obligations that school teams have to make 2 players available or something like that after a game, win or lose. I think the locker room has to be open. So Jim Hammett from our site was down there and was in the Pitt locker room. He said it was a pretty uncomfortable scene. And so those guys had to go out there. They really only were out there for a couple minutes. I mean, it was clear they were struggling and they got set free. I don't think that's really a I don't think that's really a Jeff Capel issue. I think the ACC probably said they had to be there. And so they had to go out. And it was tough to watch. And it was tough that Zach Austin had to be out there. I'm not sure why Zach Austin was picked as the representative. The kid was breaking down over his, involvement in the loss, getting that foul, and probably some other moments in the game too. I mean, we talked about this yesterday after the game that, that foul at the end that gave Notre Dame the buzzer beater game-winning free throws. I mean, that was a phantom foul. It shouldn't have been a foul. It shouldn't have been called. It shouldn't have been called at any point in the game, and it wasn't called at earlier points in the game, and it shouldn't have been called right there. Certainly not in that situation where a game was headed to overtime with less than 1 second left to go. You call a foul that ultimately decides the game. I mean, that shouldn't have been the case, but unfortunately it was. So, tough on Zach Austin, but also, he had 2 missed dunks that you got to make. I mean, particularly in a game that comes down to the wire like that. Like, you should expect a game like this to come down to the wire. He misses 2 dunks, and that's, that was probably weighing on him as well. So I'm not sure why Zach Austin had to go out there and talk to the media in the post-game press conference. I thought that was a tough scene, but it was a tough scene all around. It was tough to watch Zach Austin and Jalen Lowe break down. There was some real, genuine, sincere humanity on display there, and it was tough. It was tough to watch. I don't know, I don't know what. And I felt bad for guys like Jim and Stephen Thompson and George Michalowski who were down there, having to ask questions. I mean, what do you ask guys in that situation? Like Jim asked them about how do you, how'd you guys defend them better? And I'm sure it was just I got to come up with a question about the game, but geez, what do you say in a situation like that? I mean, they got screwed. They got screwed by that call, and they certainly played a part in it. We said this over and over on the post-game show yesterday, said it over and over on the morning pit this morning that, I mean, they put themselves in a situation, they put themselves in a position to lose a game in that way by not pulling away from Notre Dame earlier, by not putting the game away earlier, by missing, Cam Corn missed the free throw on the N1. Zach Austin missed the dunks. Jalen Lowe had some questionable decisions in the final 2 minutes. any of those things go the other way. Amsal Delilich missed 2 open threes. Any of those things go the other way. Ishmael Leggett shot 2 of 9. Like we could go down the list of all the things that didn't go Pitt's way yesterday. And if any, just a couple of them go the other way, they go Pitt's way, then it's a totally different story. We're talking about a win. Well, no, we're sitting here right now talking. I forget what time Pitt, North Carolina would have been. I think it would have been. Is that game on right now? Oh, that would have been the 4:30 game or something like that. Maybe 2:30. And I'm seeing that North Carolina did beat Notre Dame by 20. Georgia Tech beat Virginia by 6, and Stanford and Cal, currently with 2 minutes left to go, is a 2-minute game, or a 2-point game, excuse me. Should be watching this game, but we're not. Hey, that's right. Stanford has Jalen Blakes, that guard that went to Duke, that Pitt tried to get coming out of high school and had him all but wrapped up, and then right at the end, he went to Duke. He's got 21 points today for Stanford, but that's the kind of guy you can go out and grab. Yeah. So, if just a few of those plays go the other way, we're sitting here. Well, probably not at this point. We might still be doing the live show, or maybe we just be, have done a post-game show earlier today. But, we'll be talking after a win, seeing how Pitt did against North Carolina and whether it'd be moving on to face Wake Forest. It wasn't, it wasn't a terrible draw for Pitt. Like, Notre Dame's a team they should be able to beat. We know they can beat North Carolina because they did. And Wake Forest was a team they should be able to beat as well. I mean, they almost beat them on the road. So, I mean, it wasn't a terrible draw to go through Notre Dame, North Carolina, and Wake Forest, to get yourself into, playing on Friday. But it's no good if you can't get past Notre Dame. Adam Vinchik says, no Jim tonight. No, Jim's in North Carolina. He was down there to cover the ACC tournament game yesterday. I think he stayed down there. I forget if they're staying tonight or not. But I kind of figured, I mean, even if he came back today, he's unlikely to make it back in time to do this show tonight. So figured we'd fly solo. We'd do it like the old days and have our one-man live show. See how it goes. But we'll get Jim back next week. We'll be back in our regular swing of things. Swim Boyd asked, did you know the first Panther-Lair interview of spring camp was going to be no real camp talk? Yeah, so if you missed this, yesterday spring camp started. We followed the typical practice regimen. We get down there at the start of practice. We watch the first few periods, largely special teams and things like that. And then we go inside. They finish up practice. We have post-practice interviews. We usually talk to Pat Narduzzi, one or two coaches, some players, and have some conversations. Yesterday, Pat Narduzzi was the only person to talk to us after practice. And rather than taking questions about practice or last season or anything like that, he just talked for about 8 minutes about Mason Alexander, the freshman cornerback who passed away, I guess it was 2 weekends ago in his hometown of Indianapolis. Sad news, tragic news, and Narduzzi hadn't really spoken publicly about it. He put out a press release the day after Mason passed away, but he hadn't really talked about it. And I think he just wanted to talk about that yesterday. I think he wanted to say something about Mason Alexander, and then kind of felt like it might be awkward to go from saying something heartfelt and genuine and sincere about a young man who passed away and turn directly to, so look, let's talk about the offensive line depth chart. And he's probably right. I think we probably could have done it. I think we could have asked questions. It would have been a bit of an awkward transition, but I mean, we're there for a reason. You know what I mean? Like there's a reason we're all sort of gathered together. It's to cover this team in practice. But so it would have been an awkward transition, but we could have gotten back to business. I think yesterday after talking about Mason Alexander for a little bit, but I don't think Narduzzi was really interested in that, so we didn't do it. He didn't really take any questions on anything other than Mason Alexander and the team's response and reaction to his death. And I mean, it was appropriate. It was appropriate. It's a sad moment. It's a tragic moment. And so it was an appropriate sort of approach, I think, from Pat Narduzzi. But I'm looking forward to tomorrow when we'll get to actually ask some football questions and kind of get into the football conversation. I'm looking forward to that. So, yeah, that'll be we'll get back into the regular swing of things tomorrow. Let's see. Scrolling through. Yeah, people are talking about Robert Morris. Pitt WVU says Robert Morris has more NCAA tournament appearances than Pitt does in the last almost 10 years. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Goes on to say they got in again this year and they got in the COVID year when the season got canceled and last year. You're right. Andy Toole's doing a great job at Robert Morris. Like if shout out to Moon Township, shout out to the Colonials. Andy Toole is doing a great job out there. There's no question about it. Like that guy, to me, it's still a surprise that he's still around at Robert Morris, that he hasn't moved on to another job. I think a guy like him wouldn't typically stay at Robert Morris as long as he has. I mean, I think it's credit to him for some loyalty and kind of just sticking with it, but can't be there for all that long. And I would think at some point he's going to move on because he's done a great job there. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And they brought in transfers. They've had to deal with losing transfers, but they've also brought in transfers. And I think they have a great program. There's no question. And there they go. They just won the Horizon League last night. Huge win, getting into the NCAA tournament. And, good luck to the Colonials going forward. Yeah, there's no question. They've had more success recently than Pitt has. A lot of Pitt's struggles have been self-inflicted. I think when you go through the Duke Kevin Stallings years and the first certainly 4 years of Jeff Capel, there were a lot of self-inflicted woes, and wounds, and self-inflicted issues and ways that Pitt held itself back. And it doesn't excuse the last 3 years, or the last 2, I should say, because 3 years ago 2 years ago they did make it in the NCAA tournament. Last season and this season they didn't, and there's no excuse for that. Is Andy Toole a better coach than Jeff Capel? He's had more success more recently than Capel has, so I guess in that regard, yeah, you would say yes. I'd love to see Andy Toole get his opportunity, get his shot at the high major level, and my guess is he would have success. My guess is he would do a good job because I think he's a pretty good coach. RJC Man 38 is a super chatter. He says Pitt needs to invest in football, and until that happens, we will not be moderately successful. I mean, they've invested in football. There's the standard things of paying the coaches well, to keep coaches in place, giving coaches good contracts, upgrading facilities, and all those kinds of things. I think I assume they plan to go all in on revenue sharing as much as they possibly can. And I think they've tried to, certainly since Alan Green came in, and even, a little bit further back than that, since Heather Lyke was fired, they've tried to cultivate NIL better than they did when Heather Lyke was the AD. And so they're trying to invest in football. They need football to have some success, and they also need more buy-in from the fans. NIL is still a fan-driven proposition, and more of that is being taken over by the schools, can be taken over by the schools, but the fans have to make moves to help drive that. And I think the schools that are being most successful with NIL are getting that fan investment, and Pitt hasn't gotten that. So you talk about Pitt needs to invest in football. I think they're trying, and they would like to, but they need that investment from the fans as well, and that's what they haven't really gotten. And that's the thing that, you can't say they will not be moderately successful. They've experienced success. Whatever you want to say about how the season ended, the first 7 games of last year were successful, and I think you can find enough injuries to sort of excuse away the final 6 and say, well, if they didn't lose this guy and that guy and that guy, they would have won more than 0 out of the final 6. But and they also won an ACC championship like 3 years ago. So there's that. But yeah, an investment has to be there for sure. Let's see. Scrolling through here. Yeah, RJC Man 38 says, "What is Alan Green doing? No plan has been outlined publicly." Yeah, the closest thing to a plan from Alan Green, I think, was when he was on Pat Bostic's radio show on 93.7 The Fan a few weeks ago or a month ago, whenever that was. And he said that, we're devising, we're working on a plan, but we have to see, you have to find out the exact details of the House settlement. I think there's an expectation of what it's going to look like. There's an expectation of what it can be and will likely be, but they're not going to announce anything as far as a plan until the settlement's been accepted and everything's sort of formalized, and at which point, like, I would like to think that when that happens, they will be able to turn around and say, okay, here's what we're going to do and here's how we're going to do it. Here's how much of the 20.5 million we are going to fund, and here's how we're going to fund it. They should have a plan ready to go, ready to be published. You know what I mean? Like like a website that's like dark right now, or a Twitter account that's private, and all of a sudden they turn it on when the settlement is announced as finalized and formalized. I'd like to think that that's what they're going to do, because they've had this time to plan. They've had this time to put something together and figure out what they want to do and how they're going to approach it. He hasn't announced anything formally or officially because I think they still need to see what it's actually going to be. I think we all know what it's going to be or assume what it's going to be, but it's got to, like I say, it has to be sort of finalized. Speaking of finalized, Stanford beat Cal 78-73. So one more game tonight, Syracuse SMU, set for a tip-off at 9:30 in the ACC tournament, final game of the day. Haven't gotten a chance to watch as much ACC tournament this week as I would have liked. Wish I'd seen more of it today, but we'll try and catch up with you tomorrow outside of spring camp. But, Swim Boyd says, what are the roster counts sitting for football? Is there changes this year with the player count? Yeah, I think they have 102 guys in spring camp this year, which is a crazy number. They used to have like half that, or like 65 or 70 guys in spring camp. Now they have about 100 and some. That's, I think, probably the House settlement will be 105. I think that's what's been talked about the most, is 105 guys, at 105 players as the roster limits. You can obviously go up as high as you want on the scholarships. You can fully fund the whole team if you want. I don't think there's a lot of upside in doing that. I'm not sure why you would do that, but you could if you wanted to. So right now, I think we've counted Pitt, in spring plus the remaining freshmen to probably be around 87 or 88 scholarship players. But again, that number doesn't matter as much. Now it's really about that total roster number. We used to just really focus on the scholarship number. Oh, are they going to be at 85? Are they going to, be under 85? How are they going to get to 85? Now it's less about that and more about how are they going to be at 105. And that is where the cutoff of walk-ons is coming. Because people talk about, this is the death of walk-ons. There are never going to be any walk-ons anymore. They'll still be walk-ons, because I don't think anybody's going to go to a fully funded roster and, put everybody on the roster on scholarship. So there'll still be spaces. There will still be spaces for walk-ons. There just won't be as many. It used to be you could have like 120 guys on your roster, and 85 were scholarship players. So that means there's room for like 35 walk-ons if you wanted to go that far. Whereas now you might still only have 85 scholarship players, but then you're going to have room for 20 walk-ons. And I think most schools like Pitt will probably settle. They'll still get at least 85 and maybe up to 90 or so, maybe 91 or 92 in a robust year. But for the most part, they'll probably stick around the same numbers. But the overall roster will be shrinking, which is kind of more notable to the coaches. I remember Pat Narduzzi being asked about now that the rosters are expanding, he's like, rosters aren't expanding, they're going down. We were talking about scholarships. He was talking about the roster as a whole. And so that it's going to look different. There are going to be fewer guys on the team, than there were in the past. And so the guys who will lose those spots will be will be the walk-ons. I think they'll be able to get under that 105. Like I said, I think they're around 100 or so in spring, which is a lot for spring camp. I mean, spring camp used to be like small rosters before you had all these guys enrolling early in January. I think Pitt brought in more than 20 players, as January enrollees between transfers and early enrolling freshmen, because more and more freshmen are doing that these days. And, and then you bring in all the transfers. They have 13 transfers that came in, kind of fills up your spots pretty quick. And you end up with a really big spring roster, which didn't used to be the case. Dave Yark says Stanford wins 78-73, a team that Pitt beat by 15 without Damian Dunn. Damn, what happened? Dave. That's $1 million question, my man. What happened? You get this 12-2 start, and you think, wow, this team is going to really be cooking. They are going to be really good. And then you finish 5-13 over your final 18 games. And you say, damn, what happened? That's a great question. And I don't know. I think there's a lot of reasons why Pitt went 5-13 after that 12-2 start. I think there's a lot of reasons why Pitt struggled through the ACC. They went 8-12 in the regular season and then lost that ACC tournament game. I think there were a lot of things that went wrong with this team. And I said this, I forget if I said it on the postgame show or on the morning Pitt today, or maybe on both. There were a lot of things that I probably said on both. As Jeff Capel goes into this offseason, he has to ask himself that question, Dave. That question you just asked me, damn, what happened? Jeff Capel has to ask himself that question. He has to ask his assistants that question. He has to ask his players that question. Everybody has to consider that question of what happened, how they got to this point, of how they started 12-2 and finished 17-15. How could it be that much of a fall? And it's really, really important. And I stressed this last night or this morning or both. I forget, but I'll stress it again because I really want to be on the record about this, that I think it's really important Jeff Capel does not allow himself to sink into the trap of when somebody asks what happened, the first answer is, well, Damian Dunn got injured. It's not about that. You can't go to that. You have to find the reasons this happened outside of Damian Dunn's injury, because it's not just Damian Dunn's injury. It's not. All right. He was not the difference. The biggest thing that Damian Dunn's injury did, I'll say this because this ties back into something I've thought about this team, something I said earlier in the show. The biggest thing Damian Dunn's injury did was it took another ball handler off the court. I think Dunn was a fine defender, a solid player on offense, but he was another guard who could handle the ball. He could drive. He could shoot a little bit. And it gave them three guys who could be the primary ball handler, along with, Austin and Guillermo, or Austin and Corin, or Guillermo and Cam Corin. As opposed to when they didn't have Damian Dunn and they refused to play Brandon Cummings and Amsal Delilich, it was Lowen Leggett plus three complementary players. And that was a bad combination. That was a bad combination to have that group together, because I think it limited the options for the guards. I think the guards needed to be able to do more, but it was hard for them to do more when they were the only guys out there who could do it. Wow, it just feels like Lowe and Leggett are trying to take over the game. Well, they were, because they felt like they had to, because there wasn't that other scorer out there. Zach Austin's not a primary scorer. Guillermo Diaz-Graham is not a primary scorer. And Cam Corin, God love him, for as much as they tried to force the ball into him, was not a primary scorer. Lowe and Leggett were. Dunn could be. Delilich would have been. Cummings could be. I think you need three of those guys out there. And I think when Pitt has been at their best, like when they were good last year, when they were good 2 years ago, they had three guards on the court. They had Burton Cummings and Greg Elliott or Nike Sabandi. Last year, they had Bub Carrington and Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett. You need to have that kind of lineup on the court. And they also had Blake Hinson in both of those years, and he was a pretty important piece of the puzzle. But setting that aside, because he's such a unique animal, and a beast, obviously, in what he does. Having 3 guards on the court, that's what Damian Dunn's injury, that's where it hurt the most, was because they lost that option to have 3 guards on the court. And I think that made uh, I think that changed what they were able to do. I think it put more um, pressure on Lowe and Leggett. I think it made their lives more difficult, and just overall kind of broke up the flow of what this offense was trying to, even though, like when Damian Dunn came back, it looked like they couldn't really get into a flow. It looked like it broke up the flow having him return. If he had played the whole season, I think they would have been in a pretty good rhythm by the time they got to January. So I'll give Jeff Capel that. If he wants to say, well, Damian Dunn got hurt as an excuse for what happened this season, okay, I'll give him that it changed the way his guards played and what his guards were able to do and what they felt like they needed to do. But it can't just be that. Like, he's got to take a long, hard look at the center position, what he wants it to be, what it has been, what it's been when it worked, and what it's been when it didn't, and what it realistically could be. Like, who you're realistically getting in here, what type of player, and how that affects the way you use that position. And because I don't think it was used right this past year. I don't think Cam Corrin is the answer to that. You know, and I think there's a lot of reasons why. I think when you look, I think when you look at how he plays, what his strengths are, what his weaknesses are, and just the impact of his play. Like, when he plays well, does it translate to wins for his teams? And oftentimes, no, because he just scores, and he doesn't score in the way that I think an offensive center or a scoring center can really carry a team. He kind of scores in a way that doesn't make a big difference. Some of his points made a difference yesterday. He gave Pitt the lead. He extended Pitt's lead. You know, he played well in the second half. I mean, that second half was one of the better halves that Cam Corrin has played. 10 points and 4 rebounds, all offensive rebounds in the second half. That was one of the better halves that we've seen out of Cam Corrin, certainly since the year changed, and maybe all season. It might be a top 5 or top 3 half by Cam Corrin, on the whole season. It wasn't necessarily great on defense, but he was just kind of what he was. That big kid he was defending only attempted 2 field goals in the second half, so that's a positive. But he was never a great rebounder. He never did a great job rebounding this year, and never. I think I'd have to look up his stats, but there was like a stat that I remember looking at a couple weeks ago where he had gotten more than 2 offensive rebounds just like 3 times all season or something like that. So he had 4 yesterday, which is a big step forward. That's a very positive one, very positive stat for Cam Corrin. But his performances just don't seem to translate to winning, winning basketball. And so I think you need to look at why that is. Is it about him? Is it about the things he does? Is it about what his strengths and weaknesses are? Is it about how he's being used? Why did Cam Corrin's performance, where he was a decent scoring center, why did that not translate to more wins? When he had his big games, why didn't Pitt win? What was the game he scored 21 or something like that, and they didn't win? Why is that? And Jeff Capel has to ask that question. Jeff Capel has to ask himself that question. He has to ask his assistants that question. He has to call up Coach K and ask that question. Whatever he needs to do, whoever he needs to consult with, that question has to be asked. Did they get it right with the center this year? And if not, what do they need to do to get it right next year? How can they fix that position? And is the answer as simple as Guillermo Diaz-Graham? I'm not sure that it is. Like, I'm not 100% convinced that Guillermo Diaz-Graham is the savior of this team. I think he's a good player. I think he's a valuable player. I don't think he's going to rebound all that much better than Cam Corrin. I know analytics, I think he has better rebounding percentages, but I don't think he's going to be like a difference maker on the glass. He might average 0.5 more rebounds per game or 1 more rebound per game than Cam Corrin, but I don't think it's going to be enough to make you say, wow, Pitt's a great rebounding team. Like, they need a different player altogether in order to do that. Maybe it's Papa Amadou Conti. I don't know. But they're going to need their guards to rebound well. They're going to need Amsal Delilich to rebound well if he, assuming he's around next year, which I hope he is. Brandon Cummings seems like he might be a decent rebounder. He seemed to find himself in good position for rebounds this season when he was actually on the court. So they'll need that. They need, assuming Jalen Lowe is here, they need him to be active with it. They're going to need their guards to rebound. But if they're expecting big rebounding numbers out of the center, they're probably going to have to go get somebody new. Because I don't think Cam Corrin's going to do it for you. I don't think Guillermo Diaz-Graham is going to do it for you. And I don't know what Papa Amadou Conti can really do. Yeah, he might be able to rebound well, but he's got to stay on the court and not get a bunch of fouls. So it's, like I said, he's got to figure out what he wants out of the center position. Because what they got this year, it's just not enough. And it's a big part of why I don't think it's everything of why they struggled this year. As a matter of fact, I don't even know if I would say it was the biggest issue for why they struggled this year. I think I think that Jalen Lowe's lack of, I can't say lack of development, because I think he did grow in certain areas this year from where he was a year ago, but he didn't grow as much as Pitt needed him to. And I think that had a lot to do with Pitt's struggles. I think he averaged like 3 turnovers per game or something like that. I just don't think I don't think he was the player they needed him to be. At times he was. He had moments of brilliance. He had moments where he looked really good. He had moments where he played really well, but it wasn't what they needed. For like what they put on his plate, it was too much. He wasn't ready for it. I think he can be next year. I think he can continue to grow and become that player that they need, but it just wasn't there this year. And I think that was as much of an issue, if not more, as the center position, which was a big issue. There's no question about it. But I think it was more of an issue with the play of the guards, really. And truthfully, like Lowe and Leggett, for as much as those guys did for this team this year, as much as they carried this team to wins, and they did. They played a lot of winning basketball this year, those guys did. But they also had times where they were not helping the team win. I mean, you look at yesterday in the second half, what was that stat I had? I forget, those two guys they shot really poorly in the second. I mean, I have the stat right in front of me. Why would I sit here and try and guess on what those guys? Oh, 3 of 14. 3 of 14 in the second half, and the rest of the team was 10 of 16 in the second half. Like Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett didn't really help Pitt win in the second half. Lowe had 3 assists and 2 rebounds, which is big, but he also had 3 turnovers in the 20 minutes that he played. Leggett 0-4 from the floor. He had 5 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 turnover, but he wasn't scoring. And so those two guys go 3 of 14. The rest of the team goes 10 of 16. You got your points from the rest of the team, not from those guys. And those are the guys who should be carrying you to victory, but they very much weren't, particularly in the second half yesterday. And I feel like there were too many halves and too many games that were like that. And I feel like I'm kind of like hedging here, because I don't want to put too much on those guys, too much blame on Lowe and Leggett, because they were Pitt's best players this year. They really were. They just, I don't know if too much was asked of them, or too much was demanded of them, or too much was put on their plates, but they weren't quite entirely what Pitt needed. Pitt needed something more, and those guys just couldn't give it. And when they couldn't get it, when the shots weren't falling, when they weren't playing well, they kept trying to shoot themselves out of it, which I think the coaches like, and they certainly have the green light from Jeff Capel. But it didn't really, it often didn't work out. They would end up with a really poor shooting night, a 6 of 16 or something like that, or worse, because they just didn't have it that night. But they felt like they had to be the guys to carry the team, to win the games. And so they played like that. So I think that was an issue as much as anything out of the center position. They didn't get good rebounding, but they probably weren't going to be a great rebounding team anyway. I thought Leggett would rebound better. Leggett was a decent rebounder, but you weren't going to get great rebounding out of the forwards. Like Corrin and Guillermo just weren't going to be good rebounders. and they weren't good rebounders. They weren't productive rebounders, just either not strong enough, not good enough positioning, not good enough desire, or whatever you want to call it. They just didn't have it, and that was a major issue. But I think you believed you could rely on the guards, that the guards could carry you, the guards could have that big season, and this would be a guard led team, which it was, for better and for worse. So I think there were a lot of issues with this team. The center position was certainly one of them, but it wasn't all of it, and it wasn't maybe not even the biggest issue. Let's see. Davey Ark says, start with Terrell Brown. This team does not develop centers. It needs to be some coaching changes. If it isn't capable, it's got to be somebody. Developing centers, I think it's tough. I think it's hard to find good centers. I think it's tough to get those guys. They're out there. You can find them. Jeff Cable probably has to decide what kind of center he wants. Does he want a guy like a Cam Corrin, John Hughley type, or does he want a Federico, Guillermo Diaz-Graham, Mo Gee type? And Guillermo and Mo were 3-point shooters, whereas Federico was not. But they're different kinds of guys. I mean, let's leave Federico out of it because he was a different sort of player. Although, you know what, that's actually a different type of guy that's relevant as well. In a way, Mo Gee was sort of a combination of Guillermo and Federico. He had that rim protection. He could block shots, but he could also step out and shoot threes. So how about that? Like, do you want Mo Gee or do you want Cam Corrin? Like right now, at the end of a season where Pitt had Cam Corrin and didn't do very well, I would probably say Mo Gee. I'll take the 3-point shooting center who can block shots. I forget how well Mo Gee rebounded, but with the shot blocking and the 3-point shooting, I'll take it. I'll take it. I think that's valuable enough, particularly if you're a center that they have to guard out to the 3-point line, which nobody ever had to guard Cam Corrin out to the 3-point line. He wasn't a threat from shooting out there. So it's a different kind of different. And this is what Jeff Cable has to figure out. Like, who does he want? What kind of center does he want on his team? What kind of center does he want manning the interior for Pitt going forward? And he's got to make that decision for next season. So it's a big decision. It's one of many decisions Jeff Cable's going to have to make throughout this offseason. All right, this is the last thing. RJC Man 38 says Jeff Cable is not a good communicator, so he will never say what Pitt's failings were this year. His poor communication is the number one flaw that led to his failure at Pitt. I disagree. I think he's a great communicator, actually. I think it's one of his biggest strengths is his ability to communicate. I think he connects with the kids well. I think he's good with the media. I think he's a great representative of the university. The thing he is missing is wins. That's it. And I said this from the time that Jeff Cable got hired in like his second year, his third year, his fourth year. I was like, man, if this guy could ever win, he could absolutely be the face of the athletic department in the university. He just needs to win. And then when he did win, for like the last 2 seasons prior to this year, he was great. And he was like the best interview on campus. And it was awesome to interview him. It was great to talk to him. He is a great communicator. So I wholeheartedly disagree with what you're saying, sir. I think you're completely wrong. His failings are elsewhere. They're not in communicating. I think his communication skills are really, really strong. All right. I think that's about it. We just had another comment come in, but I'm going to get my notes out. Let's see. Alex R says, I struggled with the last 30 seconds or so. First, Jeff Cable's baseline out of bounds play was garbage. He had an extra timeout as the refs were looking at the replay, didn't take advantage of it, got the ball into Jalen Lowe, and a turnover. The last 30 seconds, that was a rough spot. Jalen Lowe tried like a scoop play, like almost like an up and under type of thing, and he missed. The ball got knocked out. They went to review to make sure it went out on Notre Dame. Whatever, they didn't really draw up a play. It ended up getting into Jalen. I think it was probably one of those baseline plays that they just toss it deep to Cam Corrin. Corrin gave it to Lowe. Lowe dribbled. He went along the baseline and stepped out. That was bad. That was bad. That was a bad play. The game's, tied at that point. It's 54-54. It's 20 seconds left to go, and Jalen Lowe steps out of bounds, gives Notre Dame the ball, and gives them a chance to go down. And, rest is history with a foul, a free buzzer-beating free throw. All right, that's going to wrap us up here. This is a buzzer-beating podcast, but I thank everybody for tuning in tonight. It's been a lot of fun, as always. Apologize for some of the sound on the morning pit today, but I think it was a little bit better tonight. We'll have to work on our software. Listen, make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and then head over to check out the website Panther-Lair.com on the 24/7 Sports Network. We always enjoy having new people join and get in the conversation on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. You might enjoy this hour-long show every Wednesday night, but the message boards are like this all day, every day, with lots of people talking about Pitt sports. So come and hang out. Panther-Lair.com. We'll be in the South Side tomorrow for Pitt Spring Camp. We'll have coverage from that and everything going on in the world of basketball as we move into the offseason. Hey, maybe there's an NIT, right? Or maybe there's an NIT invite for Pitt, is how I should say. All right, thanks for tuning in tonight. We appreciate it. Thanks for all the comments and questions and all those things. Make sure you like and subscribe. Have a good night. We'll catch up with you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.